The air in the delivery room, usually sterile and hushed, hummed with a different kind of energy that cool November morning in 1940. It wasn't the usual tension of medical emergency, but a low thrum of anticipation, almost theatrical, as if the universe itself held its breath. Outside the window of Jackson Street Hospital, San Francisco still slumbered, a city of hills and fog, oblivious to the small, profound event unfolding within its brick walls. Grace Ho, her Eurasian features etched with the beautiful, ancient lines of labor, pushed with a strength that belied her petite frame. Her husband, the celebrated Cantonese opera star Lee Hoi Chuen, paced the corridor just beyond the door, a nervous tiger in a silk robe, his powerful baritone usually filling grand halls now reduced to a hushed murmur of prayers. The midwife, a woman with kind, calloused hands, coached Grace through the final throes. Then, with a cry that was both fierce and fragile, a new life entered the world. It was the hour of the dragon, in the year of the dragon, a convergence of auspicious omens that even in the modern West, resonated with the deep-seated beliefs of the Lee family. Lee Jun-fan, as he would be formally named, arrived with a vigor that promised a life far from ordinary. His skin, a delicate canvas, held the subtle blend of his mother's European and Chinese ancestry, a nascent duality that would define his very being. For the first few months of his life, Jun-fan knew no fixed home. His crib was often a makeshift arrangement in the dressing rooms of grand theaters, the lullaby the distant, soaring melodies of his father's opera. He breathed in the scent of grease paint and old velvet, the metallic tang of stage lights, the faint, sweet perfume of his mother. He felt the rhythmic sway of trains traversing the vast American landscape, the gentle rocking of the ocean liner carrying them back to Hong Kong. He was a tiny nomad, a silent observer of a world in constant motion, a world of performance and transient beauty. This nomadic infancy, this early exposure to the stage, to the fluid nature of identity and place, was the unconscious bedrock of his destiny. He was a child born into movement, unknowingly set on a path of unique cultural synthesis, his very first breath taken on foreign soil, yet his spirit bound to the ancient rhythms of his heritage. He would carry the echo of those train whistles and ship horns, the scent of those far-flung cities, deep within him, a restless energy forever seeking expression. The return to Hong Kong in the mid-1940s was not a quiet settling. The city, still scarred by war, was a cauldron of rebuilding and simmering tensions. Its streets, narrow arteries choked with rickshaws, hawkers, and the ceaseless chatter of 1,000 dialects, were a stark contrast to the sprawling, orderly American cities he had fleetingly known. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine tea, roasting duck, and the humid breath of the South China Sea. Young Bruce, a name given to him by a nurse at birth and one he would increasingly adopt, found himself immersed in this vibrant chaos. He was a whirlwind of energy, a small typhoon in human form. His eyes, dark and quick, missed nothing. He was bright, fiercely intelligent, but also mischievous, often rebellious. The post-war era was harsh, and children, especially those with an abundance of spirit, often found themselves drawn to the edges of society. Bruce, with his boundless energy and a burgeoning sense of justice, quickly became involved in the street gangs that carved up the city's districts. Fights were not uncommon, they were a language spoken in the alleyways, a brutal ballet of survival. Bruce, small but agile, learned quickly. He learned to read intentions in a clenched jaw, to anticipate a blow before it landed, to move with a fluid grace that was instinctively martial. His parents, accustomed to the structured elegance of the stage, watched with a mixture of exasperation and concern. Their son, the future star, was becoming a street brawler. It was Lee Hoi Chuen, with his deep understanding of discipline and movement, who decided upon a path that would channel Bruce's raw energy. He enrolled him in Wing Chun Kung Fu under the legendary Grandmaster Ip Man. The Wing Chun school was a sanctuary of quiet focus amidst the city's clamor. The scent of liniment and sweat mingled with the faint aroma of incense. Ip Man, a man of profound stillness and devastating power, taught with a quiet authority that captivated Bruce, even as his rebellious spirit initially chafed against the rigid forms. Bruce was a sponge. He devoured the lessons, not just the physical techniques but the underlying philosophy, the economy of motion, the directness. He practiced relentlessly, his small body transforming, hardening, becoming a finely tuned instrument. He learned from Ip Man, from his senior kung fu brother Wang Shunliang, absorbing, questioning, adapting. Yet, even as he found discipline in Wing Chun, the allure of performance, the legacy of his father, pulled at him. He continued to act in Hong Kong films as a child star, moving seamlessly from the gritty street fights and disciplined training halls to the glamorous, if somewhat chaotic, film sets. He played juvenile delinquents, comedic sidekicks, and even a young orphan, his natural charisma shining through even in these early roles. The camera, he discovered, loved him. The lights, the costumes, the crafted narratives, it was another stage for his burgeoning talent, a different kind of fight. He was grappling with identity, a boy who was both an outsider due to his American birth certificate and mixed heritage, and a celebrated local talent, seeking belonging in both the raw honesty of a street brawl and the carefully constructed illusion of cinema. The year 1959 arrived, a turning point. At 18, Bruce Lee was sent by his parents to the United States. The decision was born of concern his street fighting had escalated, his grades suffered, and perhaps, a quiet fear that his restless spirit needed a larger canvas. The journey across the vast Pacific was more than just a physical migration, it was a severance, leap into the unknown. He arrived first in San Francisco, the city of his birth, a place he knew only from stories. He stayed briefly with family friends, the unfamiliar quiet of their home a stark contrast to the boisterous Hong Kong he had left behind. The American air felt cleaner, sharper, yet held a subtle chill of loneliness. Soon, he moved north to Seattle, Washington, a city draped in shades of green and gray, where rain was a constant companion and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. This new world was one of opportunity and challenge, a quiet academic setting that was a stark contrast to his past, yet ripe for the explosion of his revolutionary ideas. He worked various jobs washing dishes in a Chinese restaurant, delivering newspapers, each task a lesson in humility and self-reliance. He enrolled at the University of Washington, initially majoring in drama, then philosophy, his mind hungry for knowledge, for frameworks to articulate the intuitive truths he felt in his body. It was in Seattle that the seeds of his unique approach to martial arts truly began to sprout. He found a small group of students, eager to learn what this young, charismatic Chinese man had to teach. He started in backyards, then moved to a small, rented space, eventually opening his first official Junfan Gung Fu Institute. He taught not just techniques, but principles, philosophies. He questioned the rigid adherence to tradition, the stylistic limitations of established schools. Why, he would ask, his eyes alight with intensity, must we be confined by forms when life is formless? His methodology was fluid, adaptable, emphasizing efficiency and personal expression. Jesse Glover became his first student, followed by the quiet, intensely loyal Taki Kimura, who would become a lifelong friend and assistant instructor, absorbing Bruce's every lesson with devout dedication. And then, there was Linda Emery. She walked into his class, a young, bright-eyed woman with an intellectual curiosity that matched his own. Their connection was immediate, palpable. She was drawn to his energy, his intelligence, his unconventional charm, he, to her quiet strength, her unwavering support, her grounding presence. Their relationship blossomed amidst the rain-swept streets of Seattle, the hushed halls of the university, and the vibrant, energetic atmosphere of his burgeoning martial arts school. She saw beyond the flashy moves, beyond the rebellious exterior, to the philosopher, the artist, the man driven by an insatiable quest for truth and self-expression. He found in her a steadfast anchor, a partner who understood the depth of his ambition and the complexity of his vision. 1964 was a pivotal year, a year that would launch Bruce Lee onto a wider stage. He traveled to Long Beach, California, a sun-drenched coastal city, for the International Karate Championships. The atmosphere was electrifying, a convergence of traditional martial arts masters and the emerging American counterculture. The air thrummed with the energy of anticipation, the scent of liniment and nervous sweat mingling with the salty breeze from the Pacific. Here, amidst an audience of renowned martial artists and curious onlookers, Bruce Lee took the stage. He was a revelation. His demonstrations were not just feats of physical prowess, but an articulation of a revolutionary philosophy. He showcased his one-inch punch, a seemingly impossible strike delivered with minimal movement, yet possessing devastating power, sending a man twice his size staggering across the stage. He moved with a speed and fluidity that seemed almost supernatural, blurring the lines between attack and defense. But it was his words, delivered with passionate conviction, that truly captivated the audience. He spoke of emptying the mind, of being formless, shapeless, like water. He challenged the rigid dogma of established styles, advocating for adaptability, personal honesty, and the pursuit of individual truth in combat. Research your own experience, he urged, absorb what is useful, discard what is useless, and add what is specifically your own. This electrifying performance garnered him significant recognition and, crucially, led to connections within the nascent Hollywood community. Producers and directors, intrigued by his charisma and unique skills, began to see his potential beyond the martial arts arena. But amidst this public emergence, Bruce's private life was also undergoing a profound transformation. He and Linda Emery, their love having deepened and matured, married in a quiet ceremony. Soon after, their first child, Brandon Lee, arrived, bringing a new dimension to Bruce's life. The quiet joy of starting a family, the tenderness of holding his newborn son, was a stark contrast to the public demonstrations of power and philosophy. He was a visionary finding his voice and a platform, driven by a desire to innovate and share his unique perspective, while embracing the profound responsibilities of fatherhood and marriage. These dual forces, public ambition and private devotion, would forever shape his path. It was during this period, fueled by his experiences in combat, teaching, and life, that Bruce began to formally develop Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. It wasn't a style in the traditional sense, but a philosophy, a concept. It was about freedom, directness, and efficiency, stripping away the superfluous to get to the core of combat, and by extension, the core of self. He worked tirelessly in his Oakland school, alongside trusted confidants like James Yim Lee, a formidable martial artist and metalworker, who helped him refine techniques and articulate his evolving principles. Dan Inosanto, another brilliant martial artist, would soon join his circle, absorbing and later propagating the essence of Jeet Kune Do. Bruce was building not just a fighting method, but a philosophy for life, a testament to his belief in constant evolution and adaptation. The mid-1960s saw Bruce Lee move to Los Angeles, California, drawn by the siren call of Hollywood. The city glittered with promises, a sprawling metropolis of dreams and illusions, where palm trees lined boulevards and the sun always seemed to shine. But beneath the glamour, Bruce quickly discovered a world often prejudiced and resistant to change. In 1966, he landed his first major acting role as Kato in the television series The Green Hornet. He was not the star, but his presence was undeniable. Clad in his iconic green mask and matching uniform, he moved with an explosive grace that had never before been seen on American television. He brought a new dimension to the sidekick role, a quiet intensity and a lightning-fast fighting style that captivated audiences. The show, though short-lived, garnered him a cult following. Children, especially, were mesmerized, imitating his distinctive battle cries and swift kicks in playgrounds across the nation. Despite the Green Hornet's cancellation in 1967, Bruce Lee continued to make guest appearances in other series, notably Longstreet, where he played the role of a martial arts instructor to the blind detective. He often choreographed his own fight scenes, infusing them with the realism and efficiency of Jeet Kune Do, pushing the boundaries of what was considered acceptable on-screen combat. He was ambitious, relentlessly pursuing opportunities, spending countless hours practicing, writing, refining his craft. Yet, a deep-seated frustration began to simmer beneath his confident exterior. Hollywood, for all its glitter, remained stubbornly resistant to casting an Asian man in a leading role. He chafed against the racial barriers, the pervasive stereotypes that confined Asian actors to subservient, often caricatured, roles. He was offered parts that he found demeaning, roles that required him to adopt exaggerated accents or portray one-dimensional villains. He wanted to play heroes, complex characters, men who transcended race. He saw the potential for a new kind of action hero, one who embodied grace, intelligence, and philosophical depth, but the studios were slow to catch on, blinded by their preconceived notions. Bruce felt torn. The allure of Hollywood, the dream of global stardom, was powerful. He had moved his young family there, building a home, forging friendships with figures like Steve McQueen and James Coburn, who became his students and confidants. He was respected within the martial arts community, his private classes attracting a diverse array of celebrities and athletes, including Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But the constant struggle for meaningful roles, the endless pitching of ideas that went nowhere, the feeling of being perpetually typecast, began to wear him down. He was a talent caged, a force of nature struggling against an immovable object. The years from 1966 to 1971 were a period of cautious optimism mixed with growing frustration. He was close, so tantalizingly close, to breaking through, but the final leap seemed perpetually out of reach. His ambition, however, remained undeterred. He began to consider a radical alternative, a return to Hong Kong for film work. The idea, once a distant possibility, now grew into a compelling necessity. He knew he was a star, a visionary, and if Hollywood couldn't see it, perhaps his homeland, the place of his tumultuous youth, would. He yearned for creative control, for the freedom to tell his own stories, to embody the heroes he knew the world was ready for. The simmering potential for a breakthrough was there, but it seemed it would not be found on American soil. The stage was set for a homecoming, a gamble that would either cement his global legacy or plunge him back into the anonymity he so fiercely fought against. If you're finding this deep dive into Bruce Lee's early life and struggles compelling, please consider subscribing to ensure you don't miss the unfolding story of his meteoric rise and the mysteries surrounding his untimely death. The decision to leave Hollywood, to turn his back on its glittering but unyielding facade, had been a slow, simmering burn within Bruce. Now, as the plane descended through the humid Hong Kong air in 1971, a profound sense of vindication settled over him, a quiet triumph that tasted sweeter than any studio contract. Linda, seated beside him, squeezed his hand, her gaze steady, reflecting the mix of apprehension and hope that always accompanied their biggest leaps. Brandon, a whirlwind of 5-year-old energy, and Shannon, barely 2, stirred in their seats, oblivious to the seismic shift their lives were undergoing. The moment they stepped off the gangway, the city embraced him, not with the polite, guarded interest of Hollywood, but with a roaring, visceral affection. The air hit him first, a thick, tropical embrace laden with the scent of exhaust fumes, ginger, and the distant, briny tang of Victoria Harbor. A cacophony of Cantonese and Mandarin, car horns, and the insistent chatter of 1,000 excited voices washed over them. He was not just Bruce Lee, he was Kato, the masked hero from the Green Hornet, the prodigal son returned. Thousands lined the airport, pressing against barriers, their faces alight with adoration, cameras flashing like a constellation of eager stars. It was a hero's welcome, a stark, exhilarating contrast to the quiet anonymity he often felt in Los Angeles. Bruce felt a surge of adrenaline, a powerful current of belonging. This was his home, the place of his tumultuous youth, the city that had shaped his rebellious spirit. Here, he was understood, celebrated, not just as a martial artist, but as one of their own. Yet, beneath the elation, a familiar pressure began to coil in his gut. The weight of these expectations, the fervent hope in the eyes of the crowd, was immense. He had promised them, and himself, something extraordinary. Raymond Chow, the shrewd, impeccably dressed founder of Golden Harvest Studio, met them with a smile that was both welcoming and calculating. His office, high above the bustling streets, offered a panoramic view of the city, a testament to his empire. The scent of expensive tea and old paper hung in the air. Chow, a man who understood the pulse of the market, saw not just a martial artist, but a phenomenon. The negotiations were swift, direct. Bruce, now seasoned by the labyrinthine politics of Hollywood, was clear in his demands: creative control, a fair share of the profits, and the freedom to innovate. Chow, recognizing the rare fire in Bruce's eyes, agreed to a 2-film contract. It was a gamble for both men, but for Bruce, it was a lifeline, a chance to prove his worth on his own terms, to unleash the vision that Hollywood had stubbornly refused to see. As he signed the papers, the ink drying on the crisp parchment, Bruce felt the stirrings of a new chapter, a hopeful determination that tasted of destiny. The transition to actual filming, however, brought a brutal dose of reality. For his first Golden Harvest feature, The Big Boss, Bruce found himself not in the gleaming studios of Hollywood, but in the sweltering, dust-choked villages of Thailand. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of exotic spices, and the ever-present drone of insects. The film set was rudimentary, a far cry from the organized chaos he was accustomed to. Equipment was sparse, budgets tight, and the crew, though hard-working, operated on a different rhythm, often improvising, making do. Director Lo Wei, a veteran of Hong Kong cinema, was a man steeped in traditional filmmaking, his methods often clashing with Bruce's revolutionary approach. Lo Wei envisioned stylized, almost balletic fight sequences, often relying on exaggerated movements and visible wirework. Bruce, however, insisted on realism, on the raw, explosive power of Jeet Kune Do. He wanted every punch, every kick, to carry the visceral weight of genuine combat. Their arguments, often conducted in a volatile mix of Cantonese and broken English, became legendary on set. The tension was palpable, a constant hum beneath the surface of the demanding production. Bruce, his jaw often clenched, would patiently, then forcefully, demonstrate his techniques, explaining the philosophy behind each move, the economy of motion, the directness. He wasn't just an actor, he was a choreographer, a teacher, a visionary trying to drag an entire industry into a new era. The physical toll was immense. Days bled into nights under the relentless Thai sun. Bruce pushed his body to its absolute limits, performing his own stunts, enduring countless takes, his muscles screaming in protest. He choreographed elaborate fight sequences, often demonstrating every role, every nuance, to the other actors, many of whom were traditional stuntmen unaccustomed to his lightning speed and unconventional style. Sweat plastered his hair to his forehead, mixing with the dust and grime of the set. His diet, already meticulously controlled, became even more stringent, a fuel for the relentless exertion. He slept little, his mind constantly buzzing with ideas, dialogues, and fight choreography. There were moments of profound exhaustion, where the weight of the production seemed to crush him, but then he would step in front of the camera, and an almost supernatural energy would ignite within him. When The Big Boss finally premiered, the response was nothing short of a phenomenon. The raw, impactful violence, the sheer charisma of Bruce Lee, his intense, almost feral screen presence, captivated audiences across Hong Kong and Asia. The box office records shattered, then shattered again. The film was a cultural earthquake, announcing the arrival of a new kind of action hero, a new era of martial arts cinema. For Bruce, it was a profound vindication, a confirmation that his vision was not just viable, but revolutionary. Despite the grueling production, the clashes, the pain, the exhilaration of artistic freedom and the burgeoning success made every sacrifice worth it. He had done it. He had proven them all wrong. There was no time to rest on his laurels. The ink on the Big Boss contracts had barely dried before Raymond Chow, energized by the unprecedented success, pushed Bruce straight into the next project. 1972 began with the immediate commencement of Fist of Fury, once again under the direction of the often temperamental Lo Wei. The atmosphere on set was different this time. Bruce was no longer just an actor, but a proven box office titan, his star ascendant. Yet, the underlying tension with Lo Wei remained, a subtle friction that hummed beneath the surface of their interactions. Bruce, now more confident in his creative power, asserted his vision even more forcefully, insisting on deeper character development and infusing his philosophy into the narrative. The filming of Fist of Fury was a whirlwind, an escalating frenzy of superstardom. The public adoration had intensified, reaching a fever pitch. Everywhere Bruce went, he was mobbed. Paparazzi, once a distant Hollywood nuisance, now trailed his every move in Hong Kong. The weight of expectation from Chow, from the studio, and most intensely, from himself, grew heavier with each passing day. He was expected to surpass The Big Boss, to push the boundaries further, to deliver another masterpiece. He did. Fist of Fury was a more polished, more emotionally resonant film, showcasing not just Bruce's unparalleled fighting skills but also his dramatic range. His portrayal of Chen Zhen, a student avenging his master's death, resonated deeply with audiences, particularly in a Hong Kong still grappling with its colonial past. The iconic scenes, the dojo fight, the nunchaku display, the defiant kick of the "no dogs" in Chinese allowed sign cemented his superstar status. He was a force of nature, seemingly inexhaustible, his body a blur of speed and precision, his eyes burning with an almost spiritual intensity. But behind the dazzling public persona, cracks began to appear in his seemingly invincible facade. The relentless schedule, the constant pressure, the lack of privacy, and the sheer physical exertion were taking a toll. Linda, ever observant, noticed the subtle changes. The deepened lines around his eyes, the occasional flicker of weariness in his usually vibrant gaze, the way he sometimes rubbed his temples, a fleeting gesture he quickly dismissed. He was at the peak of his physical and creative powers, yet the immense pressure was beginning to manifest as nascent exhaustion. He pushed through it, fueled by sheer will, by the intoxicating taste of success, but the body, even one as finely tuned as Bruce Lee's, has its limits. The whispers of strain, though faint, were there, growing louder with each passing, demanding day. Empowered by the successive triumphs and frustrated by the continued battles for creative control, Bruce took an ambitious leap in 1972. He formed his own production company, Concord Productions, in partnership with Raymond Chow. This was more than just a business venture, it was a declaration of independence, a seizing of destiny. With Concord, Bruce would have unprecedented authority. He could write, direct, and star in his own films, fully realizing his vision without the compromise of studio interference. The air in the Concord offices, though still bustling, held a different kind of energy, one of pure, unadulterated ambition. His first project under Concord was Way of the Dragon. The production took him to Rome, Italy, a city steeped in ancient history and vibrant modernity. The contrast with the gritty, rural locales of the Big Boss was striking. Rome, with its sun-drenched piazzas, ancient ruins, and bustling street life, provided a romantic, almost epic backdrop. But for Bruce, the beauty of the city was secondary to the immense task before him. He was no longer just an actor, he was the architect of the entire film. He immersed himself in every aspect, writing the script, meticulously crafting each scene, directing the crew, and, of course, starring as the quiet, powerful Tang Lung. He thrived on the challenge, the pure creative output. The stress was immense, a constant companion, but so was the exhilaration. He would spend hours in his hotel room, hunched over scripts, making notes, sketching fight choreography, fueled by coffee and an unshakable belief in his story. Linda often found him still working in the small hours of the morning, his mind refusing to quiet. One of the highlights of Way of the Dragon was the climactic fight scene in the Colosseum, a legendary showdown with American martial artist and actor Chuck Norris. The dynamic between them was electric, a respectful clash of titans. Bruce directed Norris with meticulous detail, pushing him, guiding him, ensuring the sequence was not just a spectacle of violence, but a philosophical debate in motion. The fight was a masterpiece of choreography, a ballet of brutality that would become one of the most iconic martial arts sequences in cinematic history. Working with Norris, a friend and fellow martial artist, was a rare moment of camaraderie amidst the overwhelming pressure. But the responsibilities of running a production company, managing budgets, logistics, and a crew across continents, added a crushing layer to his already overwhelming schedule. He was constantly making decisions, solving problems, pushing boundaries. He was the visionary seizing control of his destiny, but he was also feeling the accumulating burden of creative, financial, and physical demands. Sleep became a luxury, rest a forgotten concept. He pushed himself relentlessly, driven by an almost manic energy, convinced that his moment, the moment of global recognition, was finally within reach. The strain was palpable, etched subtly onto his face, in the almost imperceptible tremor in his hands after a long day, but his eyes, though often tired, still burned with an unyielding ambition. As 1973 dawned, the promise of global stardom for Bruce Lee shimmered on the horizon, brighter and more tangible than ever before. Warner Brothers, the colossal American studio, had come calling, eager to collaborate on Enter the Dragon, a groundbreaking co-production that would finally present him to a worldwide audience on Hollywood's grandest stage. This was it, the culmination of years of struggle, the breakthrough he had always dreamed of. The stakes were impossibly high, the pressure immense. Yet, as the negotiations progressed and pre-production for Enter the Dragon ramped up in Hong Kong and Los Angeles, subtle, unsettling signs of physical deterioration began to emerge. Bruce, usually a picture of vibrant health and boundless energy, started to complain more frequently of headaches. They were not debilitating at first, just a dull throb behind his eyes, a persistent ache that he often dismissed with a wave of his hand or a quick swallow of a pain reliever. His back, too, plagued him intermittently, a legacy of countless falls, kicks, and impacts from his martial arts training and film stunts. He pushed through the discomfort, attributing it to overwork, to the natural wear and tear of a body pushed to its absolute limits. One particular decision during this period underscored the intensity of his focus on performance and his body as a finely tuned instrument. He underwent a procedure to remove sweat glands from his armpits. The rationale, reportedly, was to prevent visible perspiration on film, to maintain a flawless on-screen image. It was a testament to his meticulous attention to detail, but in hindsight, it hinted at a deeper disquiet, a desire to control every aspect of his physical being, perhaps even to override its natural functions. It was another demand placed upon his already stressed system, a subtle act of defiance against the natural limits of the human body. The atmosphere around him was thick with tense anticipation. Everyone in his orbit, Raymond Chow, the Warner Brothers executives Fred Weintraub and Andre Morgan, Linda, his students felt the palpable excitement for Enter the Dragon's potential. It was poised to be a cinematic event, a bridge between Eastern and Western cultures, a vehicle that would finally launch Bruce Lee into the global stratosphere he deserved. But beneath this glittering promise, an undercurrent of vulnerability began to flow. The demands of celebrity, the relentless schedule, the constant travel between continents, the pressure to deliver a masterpiece, all began to clash violently with the limits of his human body. Linda watched him with a growing, quiet concern. She knew him better than anyone, saw past the bravado, the confident smile. She saw the moments of deep fatigue, the way he would sometimes stare blankly into space, lost in thought or perhaps just exhaustion. He was on the cusp of global conquest, intensely focused on his biggest project yet, pouring every ounce of his genius into it. But he was also experiencing the first whispers of his body's protest, signs that were often dismissed or downplayed, seen as minor inconveniences in the grand march towards destiny. The air was charged, electric with the promise of unprecedented success, yet subtly, chillingly, overshadowed by the faint, unsettling hum of a body pushed too far, too fast, too long. The humid air of the Golden Harvest dubbing studio in May of 1973 was thick with the scent of ozone and stale coffee. Bruce Lee sat hunched in the darkened booth, the massive headphones clamping his ears, his eyes fixed on the flickering image of Enter the Dragon on the screen before him. He was meticulously reviewing the Cantonese dialogue, his own voice, sharp and resonant, filling the small, padded space. The film was nearly complete, a monumental effort, a bridge between his Eastern roots and the global stardom he was so close to grasping. Every frame, every punch, every line of dialogue had been crafted with an almost obsessive dedication. He could taste the impending triumph, feel the world holding its breath. But beneath the surface of this intense focus, a subtle disquiet had begun to stir. A dull throb, like a distant drumbeat, had started behind his eyes earlier in the day. He dismissed it as fatigue, a common companion in his relentless schedule. He often told himself, and Linda, that it was simply the price of pushing boundaries, of living life at full throttle. He swallowed a common pain reliever, washing it down with a gulp of water, and plunged back into the work, unwilling to cede an inch to weakness. Now, as he listened to a particularly explosive fight sequence, the headache intensified, blossoming into a sharp, insistent pain that seemed to echo the on-screen blows. The vibrant colors of the film began to blur at the edges, the crisp lines of the bamboo forest softening into an indistinct green haze. A wave of dizziness washed over him, making the studio's steady floor feel as if it were pitching beneath his feet like a ship on a rough sea. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eye sockets, trying to physically push the discomfort away, to restore order to his suddenly chaotic senses. Raymond Chow, seated just outside the booth with a few sound engineers, glanced up, sensing a subtle shift in the rhythm of Bruce's work. He saw Bruce lean forward, his posture suddenly rigid, his head bowed. "Bruce? Everything all right?" Chow's voice, usually calm and measured, held a note of concern. Bruce tried to respond, but his tongue felt thick, incooperative. The room began to spin violently, the fluorescent lights above the mixing board streaking into blinding lines. A cold sweat broke out on his skin, despite the cool air conditioning. He felt a rising nausea, a desperate urge to vomit. His vision narrowed, tunneling, as if he were looking through a long, dark pipe. Then, a sharp, white flash, and the world tilted irrevocably. His body spasmed, a sudden, violent convulsion that threw him against the padded wall of the booth. The headphones flew off, clattering to the floor, and a guttural cry escaped his lips, raw and involuntary. Chow was on his feet in an instant, pushing through the door, his face etched with alarm. "Bruce, what's happening?" He reached for him, but Bruce's body was already collapsing, a puppet whose strings had been abruptly cut. He slid to the floor, his limbs jerking uncontrollably, his eyes rolling back into his head, a thin froth appearing at the corners of his mouth. The sound engineers watched in stunned horror, their faces pale under the stark studio lights. The smell of ozone was now mingled with the sharp, metallic tang of fear. Chaos erupted. Chow, regaining his composure with the practiced efficiency of a man used to crisis, barked orders for an ambulance. Hands fumbled for phones, voices rose in panicked Cantonese. The sterile environment of the dubbing studio had been violently invaded by the raw, terrifying reality of a medical emergency. Bruce, the embodiment of strength and control, lay vulnerable, his body betraying him in the most public and shocking way. The wail of the ambulance siren, a mournful, urgent cry, cut through the Hong Kong traffic. The ride to Queen Elizabeth Hospital was a blur of flashing red lights, the jostle of the gurney, the murmured medical jargon of the paramedics. Bruce was dimly aware of being lifted, of the cold touch of instruments on his skin, of voices that seemed to come from a great distance. His mind, usually a torrent of thoughts and plans, was now a fractured landscape of pain and confusion. At the hospital, the emergency room was a stark, brightly lit cavern of hushed efficiency. Doctors and nurses moved with practiced urgency, their faces grim. Dr. Li Chi-Yuan, a consultant neurosurgeon, and Dr. Peter Wu, Bruce's personal physician, were quickly summoned. Examinations followed, a battery of tests, the cold touch of stethoscopes, the insistent beams of penlights. The diagnosis, delivered in grave tones, was cerebral edema, swelling of the brain. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Bruce, slowly emerging from the depths of the collapse, heard the words, but his mind immediately began to construct a narrative of dismissal. Overwork, too much stress, not enough sleep. He couldn't allow this sudden, terrifying jolt of vulnerability, to define him. He was Bruce Lee, the dragon, invincible. The incident, though profoundly unsettling, was quickly shrouded in a veil of secrecy. Chow, ever the protector of his star's image and the studio's investment, ensured that the news was contained, a whisper among a select few. Linda, when she finally arrived, her face pale with fear, found him recovering, albeit fragile. The vibrant spark in his eyes was dimmed, replaced by a weariness that pierced her heart. She listened to the doctor's explanations, the calm, clinical assessment of a body pushed to its limit. Her hand trembled as she held his. She saw the fear in his eyes, quickly masked by a forced bravado. He joked, he made light of it, but she knew. She saw the shocked awareness of his own mortality, briefly exposed, before his powerful drive and the relentless demands of his career pushed him to quickly downplay and overcome the incident, fueling an illusion of invincibility that both comforted and terrified her. She wanted him to rest, to slow down, but she knew the futility of such pleas. His ambition was a force of nature, and she was merely caught in its powerful current. The May collapse was a warning, a seismic tremor beneath the foundations of Bruce Lee's life. But in the relentless machinery of his ambition, it was quickly reclassified as a minor setback, a temporary glitch. By June, despite the harrowing experience and Linda's quiet pleas for caution, Bruce had thrown himself back into his work with an almost manic intensity. The Hong Kong heat was a suffocating blanket, but he seemed impervious to it, driven by an unyielding determination. His immediate focus was the completion of Enter the Dragon. The dubbing studio, once the site of his terrifying collapse, now became a crucible of his will. He pushed through the remaining voice work, the final edits, the last-minute tweaks, fueled by the knowledge that this film was his gateway to the world. He moved with a renewed, almost desperate energy, as if to prove to himself, and to anyone who might doubt him, that the incident had been nothing more than a momentary lapse. The exhaustion was profound, a deep ache in his bones, but he masked it with exhilaration, with the sheer force of his creative output. He would spend hours in the editing suite, his eyes glued to the screen, his mind dissecting every frame, every sound, ensuring perfection. The scent of film reels and warm projectors filled the air, a familiar comfort. Simultaneously, his mind was already light years ahead, consumed by the vision for Game of Death, his most ambitious and personal project. This wasn't just another film, it was a philosophical statement, a cinematic embodiment of Jeet Kune Do. He envisioned a multi-tiered pagoda, each level guarded by a different master representing a distinct martial arts style, culminating in a confrontation with a towering opponent, his student, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He sketched ideas on napkins, filled notebooks with concepts, discussed intricate fight choreographies with his closest students and collaborators. The creative energy was boundless, a torrent of ideas that seemed to pour from him, even as his physical reserves dwindled. His intense training regimen, far from being curtailed, became even more rigorous. He pushed his body harder, as if to punish it for its recent betrayal. In the solitude of his mirrored gym, the air heavy with the smell of sweat and liniment, he moved through his routines with a ferocious discipline. The familiar thud of his kicks against the heavy bag, the rhythmic snap of his nunchaku, the sharp intake of breath as he executed a complex move, these sounds filled the space, a testament to his unwavering commitment. But the pain, which he had always viewed as a pathway to strength, now seemed to linger longer, deeper. His back continued to ache, his muscles protested with a dull roar, and the headaches, though less severe than the one that triggered the collapse, returned with a nagging persistence. To manage these constant aches and pains, he began to rely more heavily on pain relievers. What started as an occasional necessity became a daily routine. A pill for the headache, another for the back, perhaps one more just to dull the general discomfort. They were small, innocuous tablets, easily swallowed, offering temporary respite, allowing him to maintain the illusion of an unstoppable force. Linda watched, her heart a knot of worry, as he reached for the small bottles with increasing frequency. She tried to talk to him, to express her fears, but he would wave them away, his eyes burning with the fire of his ambition, rationalizing every warning sign as a mere distraction. Outside his personal struggle, the film industry buzzed with an almost feverish excitement for Enter the Dragon's upcoming release. Posters adorned walls, trailers played in cinemas, and critics already spoke of it as a landmark film. The anticipation was palpable, a collective holding of breath for the moment Bruce Lee would finally explode onto the global stage. He was the public persona of an unstoppable force, masking the private struggles and the self-imposed pressure to perform. He was pushing his body and mind to their absolute limits, perhaps ignoring or rationalizing warning signs, convinced that the summit was finally within reach. The early days of July 1973 were a deceptive calm before the storm. Bruce Lee's calendar was a relentless tapestry of meetings and social engagements, each one a thread in the intricate weave of his burgeoning global empire. He moved through them with a practiced ease, a charismatic smile masking the exhaustion that gnawed at him from within. The air in these high-stakes meetings, whether in Raymond Chow's opulent Golden Harvest offices or in the hushed, exclusive restaurants of Hong Kong, was charged with the electricity of impending triumph. Discussions revolved around the global release of Enter the Dragon, its marketing strategies, its projected box office impact. Fred Weintraub and Andre Morgan, the Warner Brothers executives, were ecstatic, their faith in Bruce vindicated. Bruce himself, despite the underlying fatigue, radiated an infectious enthusiasm, outlining his vision for the film's reception, for its cultural significance. He also tirelessly discussed future projects, his mind always racing ahead. Game of Death consumed much of his creative energy, and he spoke of it with a passion that ignited the room. He envisioned it as his magnum opus, a film that would transcend mere martial arts, delving into deeper philosophical questions. He met with various writers, directors, and potential collaborators, painting vivid pictures of the pagoda, of the unique challenges on each level, of the ultimate message he wished to convey. He was a man with boundless ideas, a creative engine that never seemed to switch off, even as his body began to send more insistent signals of protest. On the afternoon of July 20th, Bruce had a pre-arranged meeting with Raymond Chow and Betty Ting Pei, a Taiwanese actress and friend, at her apartment in Kowloon Tong. The setting was casual, relaxed, a stark contrast to the formal boardroom meetings. Betty's apartment was tastefully furnished, a quiet oasis amidst the city's relentless energy, filled with the soft scent of incense and fresh flowers. The late afternoon light, a warm golden hue, filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. They were there to discuss the script for Game of Death, a topic close to Bruce's heart. Bruce, dressed in comfortable clothes, settled onto a plush sofa, the script pages fanned out before him on a low coffee table. Raymond Chow sat opposite him, listening intently as Bruce, with characteristic vigor, outlined a particular scene. Betty Ting Pei, elegant and attentive, offered occasional insights, her presence adding a soft, feminine counterpoint to the masculine energy of the two producers. As the discussion deepened, Bruce felt the familiar, unwelcome throb begin behind his eyes. It was more insistent than usual, a dull ache that quickly sharpened into a piercing pain. He pressed his fingers against his temples, trying to massage it away, but it persisted, a relentless drumbeat in his skull. He sighed, a rare public admission of discomfort. "My head is really bothering me today," he murmured, his voice tight with irritation. Betty, seeing his distress, rose gracefully. "Oh, Bruce, I have something that might help. It's a mild painkiller, Equagesic. It always works for me." She retrieved a small, unassuming bottle from her bathroom cabinet. It contained a combination of aspirin and meprobamate, a tranquilizer. She offered him a tablet, along with a glass of water. Bruce, grateful for the offer, took the small white pill without hesitation. He was accustomed to taking various remedies for his aches and pains, and this seemed no different. He swallowed it quickly, the water cool against his parched throat, and hoped for swift relief. He settled back onto the sofa, trying to refocus on the script, but the pain lingered, a stubborn presence. The deceptive calm of the apartment, the seemingly ordinary professional and social interactions, were imbued with an undercurrent of fatigue and the subtle presence of medical reliance, escalating, unknowingly, towards an unforeseen crisis. He was an exhausted ambition, trying to maintain his public image of strength, but privately struggling with fatigue and physical discomfort, reaching for quick relief, unaware that this seemingly innocuous gesture would set in motion the final, tragic act. The Equagesic, intended to bring relief, instead ushered in a terrifying, irreversible descent. After swallowing the tablet, Bruce tried to continue the script discussion, but the headache, far from abating, seemed to intensify, wrapping around his skull like a vice. He felt a profound weariness wash over him, a bone-deep fatigue that made it impossible to concentrate. The words on the script pages blurred, and the voices of Raymond Chow and Betty Ting Pei seemed to recede into a distant hum. "I think I need to lie down for a bit," Bruce mumbled, his voice thick with exhaustion. Betty, concerned, showed him to her bedroom. It was a serene space, softly lit, with a large, comfortable bed. He kicked off his shoes and lay down, hoping for a brief respite, a moment of quiet to allow the medication to work, to dispel the throbbing pain. The last thing he remembered was the soft texture of the pillow beneath his head, the fading light filtering through the curtains, and the distant sounds of Hong Kong traffic, now muted and indistinct. He closed his eyes, seeking oblivion from the pain, and found it in a sleep far deeper than he could have ever imagined. Time drifted, unmarked by conscious thought. Outside the bedroom, Raymond Chow and Betty Ting Pei continued their discussion, perhaps lowering their voices instinctively, allowing Bruce the peace he sought. The apartment remained quiet, a pocket of stillness in the bustling city. The soft twilight deepened into night, casting the room in deepening shadows. After a while, Chow, needing to discuss a point with Bruce, gently pushed open the bedroom door. The room was dark, silent. He approached the bed, expecting to find Bruce stirring, ready to rejoin the conversation. "Bruce?" he whispered, his voice soft. No response. He tried again, a little louder. "Bruce, are you feeling better?" He reached out, gently shaking Bruce's shoulder. There was no reaction. Bruce lay utterly still, his breathing shallow, almost imperceptible. His skin felt warm, disturbingly so, and his face was unnaturally placid, devoid of the vibrant life that usually animated it. A cold dread began to coil in Chow's stomach. He shook him harder, calling his name with increasing urgency. "Bruce, wake up!" But Bruce remained unresponsive, his body limp, heavy, utterly unresponsive. He had fallen not into a gentle sleep, but a coma-like state, a sudden, terrifying plunge into an abyss from which there was no return. Betty Ting Pei, hearing the growing alarm in Chow's voice, rushed into the room. Her eyes widened in horror as she saw Bruce, motionless on the bed, and Chow's frantic, desperate attempts to rouse him. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. "What's wrong? What's happening?" she gasped, her voice trembling. "He won't wake up," Chow said, his voice strained, his face pale. His mind, usually so sharp and analytical, was reeling. This was not fatigue. This was something far, far worse. He felt for a pulse, his fingers fumbling against Bruce's wrist, but it was weak, thready, barely there. Without another word, Chow turned and sprinted to the phone. His hands shook as he dialed, his mind racing through the terrifying possibilities. The emergency services operator's calm voice seemed impossibly distant, surreal. "Ambulance. Quickly. To Kowloon Tong. Bruce Lee needs help," he pleaded, his usual composure shattered. The wail of the siren, closer now, grew louder, a piercing, urgent shriek that tore through the quiet evening. The rapid shift from a quiet evening discussion to a frantic, desperate struggle for life was brutal, disorienting. Paramedics, their faces grim and efficient, burst into the apartment. The sterile efficiency of their movements, the immediate assessment, the sight of them placing Bruce onto a stretcher, was a sickening blur. The air, once scented with incense, now carried the sharp, clinical smell of antiseptic. Bruce, the unstoppable force, was now a fragile, inert form, being carried out of the apartment, his life hanging by the thinnest of threads, shrouded in the chaos and urgency of a medical crisis. The ambulance sped away, its siren screaming, a desperate race against an unseen, relentless adversary. The ambulance, a blur of flashing blue lights and urgent sirens, tore through the labyrinthine streets of Hong Kong, its desperate wail cutting through the night. Inside, the paramedics worked with frantic precision, their movements a choreographed dance against the encroaching darkness. Raymond Chow, his face ashen, sat beside the gurney, clutching Bruce's inert hand, his mind a whirlwind of disbelief and terror. He kept calling Bruce's name, a desperate plea, but there was no response, only the rhythmic hiss of medical equipment and the subtle sway of the vehicle. The frantic journey felt impossibly long, each second stretching into an eternity, a terrifying countdown to an unknown fate. They burst into the emergency room of Queen Elizabeth Hospital, a sterile, brightly lit arena of medical urgency. The air was thick with the metallic tang of antiseptic and the hushed, rapid-fire commands of doctors and nurses. Bruce was immediately wheeled into a trauma bay, a hive of activity where a team of medical professionals swarmed around him. Machines beeped, monitors flickered, and a symphony of urgent voices filled the space. Resuscitation efforts began instantly, a desperate battle to coax life back into a body that seemed to have already slipped too far away. The rhythmic compression of hands on his chest, the insertion of tubes, the crackle of defibrillator paddles, it was a brutal, relentless struggle. Raymond Chow was ushered to a waiting area, a cold, impersonal space filled with the silent dread of other families. He paced, his heart hammering against his ribs, the image of Bruce's still face burned into his mind. Time lost all meaning, stretching and contracting in a terrifying rhythm. He could hear muffled sounds from the trauma bay, the distant shouts, the frantic energy, but no clear information. Then, a profound and somber stillness descended. The frantic energy from the trauma bay subsided. The sounds of medical urgency faded, replaced by a chilling quiet. A doctor, his face grave, his voice soft but firm, approached Chow. "Mr. Chow," he began, his eyes full of sorrow, "we did everything we could. We tried for over an hour but he's gone." The words struck Chow like a physical blow, shattering the last vestiges of his hope. "No," he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. "No, it can't be." But the doctor's somber gaze, the quiet finality in his tone, confirmed the unthinkable. Bruce Lee, the vibrant, indomitable force of nature, was dead. The initial official cause of death was recorded as death by misadventure, due to cerebral edema, the same brain swelling that had caused his collapse in May. The explanation, clinical and precise, felt utterly inadequate, a cold, sterile label for such an immense, vibrant loss. How could such a powerful, healthy man, at the peak of his physical prowess, simply cease to be? The questions began immediately, a frantic search for understanding, for a deeper truth. The devastating news had to be delivered. Raymond Chow, his voice choked with grief, made the call to Linda Lee Cadwell. The phone rang, an insistent, jarring sound in the quiet of her home. When she answered, her voice soft with sleep, Chow struggled to find the words. "Linda Bruce, he's gone." The words, once spoken, hung in the air, impossibly heavy, shattering her world into a million irreparable pieces. Linda's scream, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony, tore through the phone line, a sound that would haunt Chow for years. Her world, which had revolved around Bruce, his dreams, his boundless energy, was abruptly plunged into an unimaginable void. Disbelief warred with a crushing wave of grief. It couldn't be true. Not Bruce. Not her Bruce. The news, initially a tightly guarded secret within the hospital, quickly leaked. Like a tidal wave, it swept through Hong Kong, then across the globe. News anchors, their voices somber, announced the shocking passing of the martial arts legend. Newspapers printed stark headlines, their pages filled with tributes and bewildered questions. The world reacted with profound shock and disbelief. How could the dragon, the symbol of invincible strength and vitality, be gone? The sterile, clinical environment of Queen Elizabeth Hospital had become the site of a global tragedy, followed by an immediate outpouring of sorrow, an immediate search for answers, and a deep, unsettling sense of injustice that would forever cling to the legend of Bruce Lee. The legend had just begun, but the man had tragically, inexplicably, ended. The news of Bruce Lee's death, a stark, clinical pronouncement from Queen Elizabeth Hospital, ripped through Hong Kong like a typhoon. It was July 21, 1973, a date that would forever be etched in the collective memory of the city, and soon, the world. Disbelief was the first, most visceral reaction, a widespread, guttural refusal to accept the impossible. How could the dragon, the embodiment of vitality and strength, simply cease to be? The air, already thick with the oppressive summer humidity, seemed to grow heavier, choked with a collective gasp of sorrow. Within hours, the streets surrounding the funeral parlor in Kowloon became a living, breathing testament to his immense popularity. A human river, thousands strong, began to flow, swelling into an unprecedented outpouring of public grief. They came from every corner of the city. Young men with slicked back hair and defiant stances, mimicking his famous poses. Old women clutching prayer beads, their faces etched with sorrow. Families with wide-eyed children, holding aloft hastily drawn portraits of their hero. The scent of incense mingled with the sweat of the dense crowd, punctuated by the mournful cries of vendors and the distant wail of police sirens trying to manage the surging tide of humanity. The funeral parlor itself was a somber, sacred space, filled with the hushed murmurs of mourners and the flickering glow of countless candles. Bruce lay in an open casket, dressed in a traditional Chinese suit, his face serene, almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the dynamic, explosive energy that had defined his life. Linda Lee Cadwell, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, moved through the throng like a ghost, her hand often resting on the small, trembling shoulders of her children, Brandon and Shannon. The world had lost a hero, but she had lost her husband, her partner, the father of her children. The public spectacle was a blur, a cacophony of condolences and flashbulbs, but her grief was a private, cavernous ache, a wound too deep for words. Raymond Chow, his face etched with a profound sorrow that transcended business, stood by her side, a silent sentinel against the overwhelming tide of media and mourners. After the Hong Kong ceremony, a poignant, public farewell, Bruce's body was flown back to Seattle, Washington, the city that had been his first true American home, the place where he had met Linda and first forged his revolutionary path. The journey across the vast Pacific was a somber, solitary one, a final homecoming. In Seattle, the atmosphere was markedly different. Here, the grief was quieter, more profound, a private sorrow shared among his closest family and friends. The gray, misty skies of the Pacific Northwest seemed to weep along with them, a gentle, melancholic backdrop to the final farewell. Lakeview Cemetery, nestled among rolling green hills, offered a serene, almost contemplative setting. The air was cool, damp, carrying the faint scent of pine and wet earth. The small gathering included his loyal students Taki Kimura, Jesse Glover, Dan Inosanto, their faces a mask of stunned sorrow. And then there were the stars, the friends who had seen beyond the public persona to the complex, brilliant man beneath, Steve McQueen, his usually stoic face softened by grief, and James Coburn, his eyes shadowed with an unspeakable loss. They stood shoulder to shoulder, two giants of Hollywood, now humbled by the death of their friend, their teacher. As the casket was gently lowered into the earth, McQueen and Coburn, along with other close friends, stepped forward, their shoulders taking the weight of the coffin, serving as pallbearers. It was a silent, powerful gesture of love and respect, a final act of devotion to a man who had touched their lives profoundly. Linda, cloaked in black, watched with a quiet, devastating dignity. Her children, too young to fully comprehend the enormity of the loss, clung to her hands, their small faces reflecting her sorrow. The world had mourned its hero, but in this quiet corner of Seattle, a family buried its beloved. The earth received him, and a chapter closed, yet the quest for truth, the burning need to understand the inexplicable, had only just begun. The official inquest in Hong Kong, a formal, judicial attempt to provide answers, was already underway, seeking to clarify the cause of death amidst a growing chorus of bewildered questions. Weeks bled into months, the world grappling with the void left by Bruce Lee. The inquest, a sober, bureaucratic process, unfolded in Hong Kong, its proceedings meticulously reported, yet often failing to satisfy the public's insatiable hunger for a definitive, dramatic explanation. In September of 1973, the official findings were finally released, a verdict that, while clinically precise, felt emotionally hollow. The conclusion confirmed cerebral edema as the cause of death, the same swelling of the brain that had led to his initial collapse in May. However, this time, it was attributed to an idiosyncratic reaction to the painkiller Equagesic, the tablet Betty Ting Pei had given him that fateful evening. The meprobamate in the drug, a tranquilizer, was identified as the probable trigger for the severe allergic reaction. The verdict handed down by the coroner was death by misadventure, a legal term implying an accidental, unforeseen outcome of a lawful act. The words, though official, did little to quell the widespread public disbelief. How could such a seemingly innocuous pill fell a man of Bruce Lee's legendary physical prowess? The public, accustomed to seeing him as invincible, as a superhuman force, found the mundane, accidental nature of his death deeply unsatisfying. The air in Hong Kong remained thick with whispers, with the subtle hum of skepticism. The official narrative, however rational, clashed violently with the public's need for a more epic, more dramatic explanation for such a monumental loss. Psychologically, the verdict created a vacuum, an emotional and psychological need for a deeper understanding that the legal system simply couldn't provide. People struggled to reconcile the image of the immortal dragon with the reality of a fragile, mortal body succumbing to a drug reaction. This incongruity fueled suspicion, giving birth to a myriad of alternative theories, each more elaborate and sensational than the last. The death by misadventure verdict, rather than providing closure, became a catalyst for enduring intrigue, challenging the accepted truth and laying the groundwork for a legend forever tinged with mystery. The official finality battled public doubt, and in the court of public opinion, doubt often proved the more compelling victor. Even as the official pronouncement settled, the world was about to witness Bruce Lee's true, posthumous explosion onto the global stage. 1973, the year of his death, also marked the global release of Enter the Dragon. It was a bittersweet triumph, a poignant irony that the film destined to make him an international superstar would do so only after his passing. The film, a groundbreaking co-production between Golden Harvest and Warner Brothers, broke box office records worldwide, captivating audiences with its slick production, compelling narrative, and, above all, Bruce Lee's electrifying performance. His speed, his charisma, his philosophical depth, all shone through the screen, mesmerizing millions who had never seen anything like him. The world celebrated his genius, even as it mourned his loss. The success of Enter the Dragon was unprecedented, a phenomenon that cemented his legacy as a cinematic icon. Suddenly, Bruce Lee was everywhere on magazine covers, posters, and conversations, his image synonymous with martial arts excellence. But the triumph was shadowed by the tragic loss, creating a fertile ground for both genuine homage and opportunistic exploitation. The unfinished Game of Death, Bruce's most personal and ambitious project, became another focal point of this bittersweet legacy. With only about 40 minutes of footage featuring Bruce himself, Raymond Chow and Golden Harvest faced a profound dilemma. Ultimately, driven by commercial imperative and the desire to honor his vision, the film was completed using stand-ins, creative editing, and even archival footage of Bruce. Released in 1978, it was a fragmented, imperfect tribute, yet it further fueled the myth around his life and death, offering tantalizing glimpses of what could have been. The iconic yellow tracksuit became an enduring symbol, forever linked to his final, incomplete masterpiece. The commercial success of Enter the Dragon and Game of Death sparked a global wave of martial arts movies, transforming the genre from niche interest to mainstream phenomenon. Suddenly, Hollywood studios were scrambling to find the next Bruce Lee, greenlighting countless films featuring martial artists, many of whom were pale imitations. This era also saw the rise of Bruceploitation films, low-budget, hastily produced movies that often cast lookalikes or actors with similar names, shamelessly cashing in on his immense popularity. These films, while often kitschy and artistically inferior, were a testament to the sheer magnetic force of his image, illustrating the enduring fascination he held over the public imagination. The world celebrated his genius and mourned his loss, while the circumstances of his death continued to intrigue and fuel endless speculation, solidifying his mythical status as a figure larger than life, even in death. As the 1980s dawned and stretched into the present day, the secret death of Bruce Lee continued to captivate the collective human psyche. The official verdict, death by misadventure, remained unsatisfactory to many, particularly in the face of such an extraordinary life cut tragically short. The human need for answers to unexplained tragedies, especially those involving cultural icons, fostered a landscape of conflicting narratives, academic scrutiny, and popular myth-making. Various conspiracy theories emerged and persisted, weaving intricate webs of intrigue around his final moments. Some whispered of Triad involvement, suggesting Bruce had refused to pay protection money or had crossed powerful figures in the Hong Kong underworld. These theories often painted a picture of a clandestine assassination, a poisoned meal, or a brutal attack disguised as an accident. The idea of Bruce Lee, the formidable fighter, being brought down by an unseen, nefarious force resonated with a dramatic narrative that many found more palatable than a simple allergic reaction. Other theories ventured into the realm of the supernatural or the familial. The notion of a cursed family line gained traction after the tragic death of his son, Brandon Lee, on a film set years later. This theory suggested a predetermined fate, a dark shadow hanging over the Lee family, an ancient curse claiming its victims. There were also more medically speculative theories, such as sudden unexpected death and epilepsy, which was not widely understood at the time of his passing. Proponents of this theory pointed to his earlier collapse and convulsions as potential indicators of an underlying, undiagnosed epileptic condition, suggesting that the equagesic might have merely been a coincidental factor, or even triggered a fatal seizure. Experts and biographers, driven by a thirst for truth and a desire to dismantle sensationalism, continued to re-examine the evidence. Medical records were scrutinized, eyewitness accounts re-evaluated, and scientific advancements occasionally offered new perspectives on the nuances of his health. Yet, despite decades of investigation and debate, no definitive alternative explanation gained widespread, authoritative acceptance. Each theory, while intriguing, ultimately lacked the conclusive evidence to overturn the official verdict. The persistent shadow of speculation and intrigue ensured that Bruce Lee's death remained an open question in the public consciousness. It was a testament to the collective human psyche's inability to fully accept a mundane explanation for an extraordinary life's end, forever seeking a deeper, more dramatic truth. The unanswered questions became an integral part of his legend, a poignant, enduring mystery that only served to solidify his mythical status. His death was not just a historical event, it was a storytelling vacuum, eagerly filled by the human imagination. 50 years have now passed since that fateful July day in 1973, and as the world entered 2023, Bruce Lee's influence remains as profound and far-reaching as ever. His impact transcends the realms of martial arts and film, permeating popular culture, philosophy, and global representation. His philosophy of Jeet Kune Do, far from being relegated to dusty historical texts, continues to be studied, practiced, and evolved by new generations of martial artists and thinkers. Its core tenets, adaptability, efficiency, personal expression, and the rejection of rigid dogma, resonate deeply in a world that constantly demands fluidity and innovation. His films, vibrant and electrifying even today, continue to inspire new generations of filmmakers, actors, and martial artists, a testament to their timeless power and his undeniable charisma. The iconic yellow tracksuit, the piercing gaze, the lightning-fast kicks, these images are instantly recognizable, woven into the fabric of global iconography. His family, particularly his daughter Shannon Lee, has dedicated herself to preserving his true legacy, often challenging the sensationalism and misinformation that inevitably cling to such a larger-than-life figure. She works tirelessly to present her father not just as a martial arts legend, but as a philosopher, an artist, a loving husband and father, a man of profound intellect and spiritual depth. Through foundations, books, and documentaries, she strives to ensure that the complexities of his life and his authentic message are understood, pushing back against the reductive narratives that often simplify his multifaceted genius. The enduring mystery of his passing, however, remains an indelible part of his story. It is a melancholic echo, a poignant counterpoint to his triumphant life, ensuring that his legend continues to grow, perpetually framed by the enigma of its end. The unanswered questions, the conflicting theories, the sheer improbability of his death at the peak of his powers, all these elements contribute to a narrative that continues to fascinate, to provoke thought, and to inspire wonder. Bruce Lee was more than just a man. He was an idea, a force, a symbol of human potential and the relentless pursuit of self-mastery. His life was a meteor streaking across the sky, brilliant and unforgettable, its trajectory tragically cut short. But the light he cast continues to illuminate, his philosophy a guiding star, his films a timeless testament to his vision. The world continues to honor his contributions, while the unanswered questions surrounding his death remain a poignant and integral part of his extraordinary, yet tragically cut short, story. He rests in Lakeview Cemetery, a quiet grave in a misty city, but his spirit, unbound by the confines of mortality, continues to move, like water, formless and free, touching lives across continents and generations. Forever the Dragon.